Now let's move on. We need to have additional assumptions in order to support this proposition. So what if you look, the monetarists, they add another assumption, like to explain the response of money, the relationship between money and these three different types of interest rate or rate of return. So they add another assumption that money demand has a very low interest rate elasticity. In other words, money demand is kind of not sensitive to the changes in this interest rate in RD, RE, and RD. So what they believe that these three R's will have a very little impact on K. So it will not really affect K. Because of that, we can make our discussion simple by simply assume that or K can be assumed to be constant. Okay, so in the money market equilibrium, this K can be assumed to be constant. It will not change. It will not change. So in order for this equilibrium to hold, okay, money supply equals to money demand, okay, the whole money demand function. What happens now? So now that we have 1 and 2, so what will happen when the central bank increase money supply? Okay, so what will happen to the money market? So we could see that since K is now constant, so K cannot change. Since K cannot change, so obviously PY will have to change, the nominal income will have to change. So based on this additional assumption, the monetarists, they are able to really show that whenever money supply goes up, nominal income will surely go up based on their analysis, because based on their findings, their investigations, is that they believe that K can be assumed to be constant. So this form is what is what we refer to as the strong QTM, because this analysis can be used to support the first proposition. Now let's go to proposition number 2. So according to monetarists, they believe that in the short run, a change in money supply will then affect real variable, like for example real output. So we're going to look at how does this happens in the short run. So remember, in the short run, we can simply assume price to be fixed and nominal wage to be fixed. So they are sticky. It takes time for price and wage to change. So to make the discussion simple, we're going to simply assume that they are fixed. And according to monetarists, they believe that the money demand function is not sensitive to interest rate. So how will that affect the slope of the LM curve? So I'm just gonna and for the sake of comparison, we're gonna also look at the Keynesian side here. So let's focus on the monetarists. So I have drawn the same IS curve, okay, in both cases. So in the monetarist case, so since money demand is less sensitive to interest rate, so how would then the slope of the LM curve be like? Do you know it? Still remember? Good. So it should be steep. So the LM curve will be very steep in the case of the monetarists. Remember the QTM, so they believe that K can be presumed to be somehow constant. So because of that, money demand will not be really affected by a change in interest rate. On the other hand, so this would then give us R0 and Y0 here in the ISLM framework, while the Keynesian, they believe that the money demand function is very sensitive to changes in interest rate because of the third motive for holding money. So the LM curve will be very flat in the case of the Keynesian. So we have R0 and Y0. So now let's have a look so according to the monetarists, they believe that a change in money supply will then have a strong influence on real variable, like real output. So in this case, let's have a look what happens when the government decided to have an expansionary monetary policy, increase in money supply. So what happens when money supply goes up now? So money supply goes up in both cases. see if I have something to be used to measure this. Okay, I'm gonna use this ruler just because I want to maintain the same horizontal distance. So let's say the increase in the money supply has caused the LM curve to shift to the right by 1 inches or 2 inches. Okay, really, better to be seen in the video. So let's say this is the same horizontal distance. Okay, so this is the new LM M1. So it has shifted to the right. So what happens now in the ISLM framework? Okay, so once money supply has increased to M1, so we could see that the new it will basically cause us to be arrive at the new equilibrium here. Okay, so this would be Y1 and R1. So we could see that there is a big, you should be able to see that it's actually a big change in a real variable, because this is Y, a real variable. So somehow, it seems that we are able to prove this in the short run, because in the short run we're going to assume price is going to be simply, there won't be too much disturbance in the aggregate demand, aggregate supply framework, as well as in the labor market. The labor market, because now there is a change in real income, basically firms will demand more labor, and since wage cannot be fixed, so there'll be a full extent of the shift in the labor demand market, in the labor demand curve, sorry. So that will cause a huge increase in employment. So employment, again, another real variable. See how a change in money supply can also affect another real variable like employment. So what about the Keynesian? So let's say I'm going to assume the same distance here. We have 2 inches. 2 inches is here. They believe that the monetarists believe that the private sector is actually stable, and all the disturbance that are distorting the market and stuff, they are caused by the government. So that's why they believe that basically the government should not really interfere. So you just need to stick to a rule on how to determine the increase in money supply, the money supply growth. So that's why, according to the monetarist, monetary policy is more effective. So remember, how do we define effective, more effective? So because a change in monetary policy will then have a larger change, will have a larger influence on real income compared to Keynesian. Okay, and this is actually caused by the different way how they look at the money demand function with regard to their sensitivity to interest rate. Now, what happens if there is an expansionary fiscal policy? So let's assume that the government decided to increase government expenditure from G0 to G1. So I tried my best to draw the ISLM curve for both the monetarist and the Keynesian. So remember this. So let's start with the monetarist. So a change in the government expenditure. So hopefully these two would be the same slope, I guess. So let's say government has increased their expenditure. So again, I'm going to use the same. So there'll be a shift in the which curve? Okay, IS curve. Okay, because G is a component in the investment I plus G schedule, which form the IS curve. So as IS curve shifts to the right, okay, so let's say again I'm going to use, let's say 2 inches. Oh, I did not draw so let's say this the initial equilibrium. So this is the initial equilibrium. We have R0 and Y0. Similarly, we have R0 and Y0 here. So 2 inches shift to the right. So 2 inches shift to the right will be somewhere here. So the IS curve shifted to the right. So here we have ISG1. Okay, a right shift. And so what happens to the new equilibrium here in the according to the monetarist? So we're going to end up with a higher interest rate and of course higher income. But here you should be able to see that the change in income, in real income, is relatively small. What about the Keynesian? So, well, we have done this many times before. So 2 inches, again, horizontal distance somewhere here. So this will be IS G1. So you should be able to see that we have a new equilibrium where R has gone up and Y has increased to the right. Okay, And you should be able to notice that the change in real income is bigger. So based on this, and remember the previous analysis on the change in monetary policy, that's why according to the Keynesian, they support fiscal policy, because according to them, fiscal policy would be more effective in influencing real output or real income, while according to the monetarists, it seems that fiscal policy is not really effective, so they prefer the use of monetary policy based on the previous video, okay? Not previous video, but previous discussion. Based on the previous discussion, a change in monetary policy would be able to cause a bigger change, a bigger increase in real income, according to the monetarists. So just to wrap up, before we move on to the next topic, so these are the four propositions put forward by the monetarists. So far you should be able, by now, you should be able to argue and explain the first two propositions, proposition number 1 and number 2. Because we have done this, okay? So in the next chapter, inshallah, we're gonna look at proposition number 3, which says that in the long run, a change in money will only change the nominal variable, while the real variable y(n) and everything else will not be affected. So that's all for now, inshallah. See you again in the next video. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.